The storm had rolled in quickly over Santa Clara.
Heavy rain battered the windows of the Dawson estate, blurring the city lights and soaking the marble step outside.
Inside the grand colonial house, the tension had reached its peak. "Get out. Right now." Margaret Dawson's voice sliced through the room, sharper than the thunder cracking overhead. Isabella stood frozen in the foyer, a small suitcase in one hand, the other instinctively cradling her abdomen, though she already knew the baby was gone. The cramps had started 3 nights ago. The bleeding followed. And no one, not Nathan, not his mother, not even the housekeeper, had asked how she was feeling. Her silk blouse clung to her body, damp from the tears and the sweat, but Margaret's voice only grew more vicious.
"You think we're stupid?
That we wouldn't find out? Those messages? The photos? You've embarrassed this family long enough." "I didn't," Isabella started, her voice a whisper, barely audible over the rain hammering the rooftop. "Save it." Margaret barked, her face twisted with disgust. "You were never one of us. Just some charity case Nathan brought home from East LA. You think by marrying into this family you became a Dawson?
Don't flatter yourself."
Isabella's eyes darted to Nathan, her husband of 7 years, standing silently beneath the chandelier. His jaw was tight. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. But he said nothing. Not a word in her defense. Not even a glance of compassion. "Nathan," her voice broke. "You know I didn't cheat. Please. Tell her." Nathan looked at her then. Not with the warmth she used to know. Not even with the bitterness she'd feared. But with cold, calculated emptiness. A void. "Don't make this harder than it already is," he said quietly. "Just go." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Isabella felt something crack, not just in her heart, but in her soul. 7 years of sacrifice, of swallowing her pride, of enduring the subtle jabs and public humiliation, and this was the end? She bent down slowly to pick up her bag. The pain in her lower abdomen sharpened, but she didn't flinch. She refused to. Not in front of them. As she turned toward the door, Margaret flung a soaked umbrella at her. It struck Isabella's shoulder, flopping uselessly to the floor. "Don't come back," Margaret sneered. "We've already changed the locks." Isabella paused at the door. She didn't look back. Her voice, though hoarse, was steady. "Thank you for showing me exactly what love doesn't look like." And then she stepped out into the storm. The wind howled as she descended the steps, each one harder than the last.
The suitcase wheel clattered against the pavement, skidding slightly on the wet stone.
Her shoes, suede flats she bought for their anniversary last year, were soaked through. Her hair clung to her face. And the tears, those didn't come from grief anymore. They came from clarity. The taxi pulled up at the corner, a dull yellow glow through the haze of rain. Isabella slid into the back seat, ignoring the driver's polite greeting. She gave an address she hadn't used in years, an old bus depot on the east side.
Somewhere out of sight.
Somewhere people like the Dawsons didn't go.
She stared out the window, watching the lights smear and twist behind the rain.
For a moment, she thought of the child she'd lost. Not even a name yet. Not even a heartbeat strong enough to echo on the monitor. That baby had been her last hope. The thing she thought might make them see her differently. That maybe, just maybe, she could belong. But that hope had died with the blood on her bedsheets. And whatever was left inside her had walked out that front door.
At the bus station, the world was quiet. Still raining.
Still cold. But quieter. Isabella sat on a metal bench under a broken streetlight, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She had no phone. Margaret had smashed it hours ago. She had no cards. Nathan had frozen their joint account. And her own bank balance?
$237.16.
Not enough to go back. Not enough to go forward. Just enough to sit in limbo. "Nasty night to be out, miss," a voice said. She looked up. A man in his late 50s, tall with a kind face, stood beside a sleek black car parked at the curb. He held a large umbrella, water dripping from its edges.
"I'm Thomas.
I drive for the Whitmore Group," he said, gesturing to the logo on the car's license plate.
"You all right?"
"I'm fine," Isabella replied too quickly, too quietly. "You sure?" he asked, glancing at her suitcase, her soaked shoes, her red eyes. She hesitated.
I missed my bus, she lied.
He smiled kindly. Well, it's freezing out here. Would you like to wait inside the car until the next one comes? I can keep the heat on.
No funny business.
Just decent shelter. She paused, weighing her options. Then nodded. The warmth inside the vehicle hit her like a wave. She leaned back, closing her eyes just for a moment. Thomas didn't speak. He turned up the heat slightly and let her rest. But the quiet didn't last long. Another car pulled up behind them, this one even more expensive. Sleek, silver, tinted windows. A man in a tailored coat stepped out, his expression drawn and tired.
Thomas, what is the hold-up?
The man's voice was deeper than she expected. Steady, but strained.
Sorry, Monsieur Whitmore, Thomas said.
Just helping someone out.
The man's eyes landed on Isabella in the backseat.
Their gazes locked. He stopped breathing for a second. So did she. He looked at her like he'd seen a ghost. Or something long lost. Your name? He asked suddenly, directly.
Isabella straightened. Isabella Reyes.
He froze.
The name registered.
The eyes, those eyes, looked so familiar. So much like hers. Is your mother's name?
Elena Reyes.
Her heart skipped. Her throat tightened. Yes, she said slowly. She passed away 4 years ago. Why? The man's face turned pale. He took a shaky step back. Because, he whispered, Elena was the woman I was supposed to marry. And I think you're my daughter.
The world tilted.
And for the first time in hours, maybe in years, Isabella couldn't breathe. The room went still. Not because the storm outside had subsided, but because Isabella couldn't process the words echoing in her mind. I think you're my daughter. She stared at the man, Charles Whitmore, CEO of one of the most powerful real estate firms on the West Coast. A name she had read about in the papers, seen on news segments, spoken in awe by clients Nathan once tried to impress. And now he was standing there, soaked from the rain, his voice trembling, eyes glassy. Thomas shifted uncomfortably beside the car. He had seen Charles navigate mergers, fire executives, survive congressional hearings. But never like this. Never undone by 5 words and a resemblance.
Isabella's voice came slowly. C'était impossible.
But even as she said it, her mother's words came rushing back, quiet whispers in a hospital bed, just days before she died.
If one day you ever feel lost, look for the man who gave you your name.
It wasn't me. It was him. Your name.
Isabella.
It was his favorite, the man said, almost as if he could hear her thoughts. She opened the door, stepping out of the car into the rain again. No. You don't get to show up and say this. Not after everything. I didn't know, he said. She looked at him. That's what they all say. And with that, she turned, dragging her suitcase through the puddles, leaving the warmth, the car, the answers behind. The motel she checked into was dimly lit and smelled faintly of mildew. The sheets were rough, the heater noisy, and the mirror cracked. But she was alone. And safe. And that was enough. Lying on the bed, she stared at the ceiling. She had no intention of reaching out to Charles Whitmore again.
Not tonight. Maybe not ever.
But sleep didn't come. Instead, memories did. 7 years of them. 7 years of her life that felt like a carefully crafted prison. She had met Nathan Dawson at a charity event during her junior year of college. He was charming, clean-cut, the son of a prominent family who had just passed the bar. He said she was different. Smart.
Real.
He liked that she came from a working-class background. Said it grounded him. And she, foolishly, believed him. They married quickly, within a year. Her mother, though hesitant, gave her blessing. Elena had cleaned houses for women like Margaret Dawson all her life. She knew that marrying into wealth didn't always mean being accepted. But Isabella was in love. She believed love was enough. It wasn't. The wedding was extravagant, funded entirely by the Dawsons. Margaret smiled in photos but whispered criticisms behind her champagne glass. The dress was a little tight. Her accent was quaint. Her parents' table at the reception was set farther from the stage than anyone else's. Still, Isabella tried. She tried to win them over. She went back to school, finished her degree, took etiquette classes because Margaret suggested it, redesigned her wardrobe, changed her hair. She learned to cook the meals Nathan liked, kept quiet when he worked late, smiled at dinner parties even when the guests mispronounced her name or called her the girl from Boyle Heights. And when she got pregnant for the first time, 5 years ago, she thought things would change. But she miscarried at 8 weeks. Margaret barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. Nathan said, "We'll try again," and went back to his meeting. She told herself it was just grief. That people had different ways of coping. That things would get better. They didn't. Jessica Monroe returned the following year. She and Nathan had gone to law school together. She was poised, blonde, brilliant, and single. At first, Isabella wasn't worried. She believed Nathan when he said Jessica was just a friend. But Jessica lingered. She brought gifts to Margaret, laughed at Nathan's jokes in ways Isabella no longer did. She offered to help Isabella redecorate the house, only to replace family photos with abstract art. Isabella noticed the way Nathan looked at her.
She said nothing.
She cooked dinner and sat across from him at night while he scrolled through his phone. She smiled when Jessica stayed late at the office. She convinced herself that silence was strength. That dignity meant endurance. Then came the pregnancy again, this time unplanned, unexpected, but desperately hoped for. She didn't tell Nathan right away. She wanted to wait until she was sure. But her body betrayed her again. This time, the loss was worse. The bleeding wouldn't stop. And Nathan was in San Diego with Jessica for a conference. When he returned, he found her pale and weak on the couch. Margaret accused her of seeking attention. No one took her to the hospital. She went alone. And when the photos and messages appeared, screenshots of text threads with a man she'd never met, doctored images of her at a cafe, she finally saw the truth. Not just about Jessica, but about Nathan. About the Dawsons. About herself. She had given them 7 years.
7 years of silence.
Of shrinking. Of trying to fit a mold that was never meant for her. And what had she gotten in return?
A shattered date. A dead child.
And a suitcase of regrets. She rose from the bed and opened her laptop.
The screen flickered to life.
She typed in the name, Charles Whitmore. Page after page of results appeared. Real estate mogul. Philanthropist. Divorced.
No known children.
Her mother had never spoken of him in detail.
Just fragments.
Hints. Pain. A love lost. She found an old photo, Charles in his 20s. The resemblance was striking.
The jawline. The eyes. The hairline she hated in the mirror every morning.
She closed the laptop. Was he telling the truth? Did it matter? He wasn't there when she needed a father. Just like Nathan wasn't there when she needed a husband. Just like no one had ever been there except her mother. But her mother was gone. And she was still here. Broken. But breathing. Alone. But alive. She stared at the rain outside the window.
If nothing else, she knew one thing.
Tomorrow, she would not be the same woman who walked out of that house. She would never be that woman again. The morning light seeped through the motel curtains, dull and gray like the storm that had passed. Isabella sat at the small desk in the corner, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee from the lobby machine. Her reflection in the mirror was tired, dark circles under her eyes, her lips pale, her hair undone. But there was a new edge to her expression. A stillness that came not from defeat but from realization. She had nothing left to lose. Her phone was gone. Her marriage was over. Her child, never born. The name Isabella Dawson had been stripped from her like a borrowed coat returned in shame. But there was power in being discarded. It gave her freedom. She opened her laptop again and searched the name, Jessica Monroe. The woman was everywhere. Partner at Dawson and Hyde Law, celebrated speaker on legal ethics, board member of 3 nonprofits, and recently featured in a Forbes 30 Under 30 list. The article described her as a visionary attorney with both the brilliance and charm to change the legal world. Isabella remembered her differently. It started subtly. Jessica joined the firm about a year into Isabella's marriage. Nathan introduced her at a firm gala, his hand resting just a little too comfortably on her back.
Jessica smiled at Isabella that night, wide, genuine, tout perfect.
I've heard so much about you, she said. But she never said what. In the months that followed, Jessica appeared more and more. At family dinners. At fundraisers. She brought Margaret a rare orchid from a trip to Asia. She gifted Nathan cufflinks engraved with Latin phrases Isabella didn't understand. Once, she complimented Isabella's dress at a party and then offered to loan her something more modern for the next event.
Isabella looked it off.
Smiled. Thanked her.
Always polite. Always silent.
But she noticed. She noticed the way Jessica leaned closer when Nathan spoke. The way she lingered when no one else was around. The text messages that made him smile. The way his eyes lit up in meetings with her but barely flickered when Isabella walked in the room. Still, she said nothing. Then came the night Jessica brought wine over to the house, claiming they had to celebrate a big win. Nathan wasn't home yet.
Margaret was substaire. Jessica insisted Isabella joint.
They drank. Talked. Laughed even, though Isabella felt something strange. Attention. You know, Jessica said, swirling her wine, Nathan's lucky to have someone like you. Isabella smiled faintly. Thank you. Most men wouldn't have the patience to handle someone so traditional. The comment stung, but Isabella held her expression. What do you mean?
Jessica shrugged, her voice sweet. I mean, you're lovely.
Very sincere. But this world moves fast, ISA. Especially for men like Nathan. It's important to evolve. The next day, Isabella found a new blazer in her closet.
Designer.
Her size. No tag. Nathan never mentioned it. She knew who had left it. She began to sense it then. That she was no longer a wife, but a placeholder. A quiet, pretty picture frame sitting on a mantel, soon to be replaced. Still, she stayed. She tried. Because her mother had taught her that love was sacrifice. Because walking away felt like failure. Because the voice in her head said maybe it was all in her mind. But it wasn't. It all came to a head on a Thursday afternoon. Isabella had just returned from the clinic, another blood test, another appointment confirming what her body already knew. The pregnancy was over. She entered the house and found Margaret in the kitchen, flipping through a magazine. On the counter, a stack of papers sat neatly, with a red folder labeled private. Margaret looked up, her eyes cold.
Your husband est substaire, she said.
You might want to ask him about those. Isabella opened the folder. Her stomach turned. Screenshots of text messages. Explicit.
Suggestive.
Her name on the sender line.
A strange number.
A man she had never met. Photos. Blurry. Her figure, clearly manipulated, sitting across from a man in a cafe. Margaret smirked. You're not even good at cheating. Isabella dropped the folder. They're fake, she whispered.
Margaret stepped closer.
You expect us to believe that? You've been a burden since day one. Finally, Nathan sees it too. Isabella turned, stumbling upstairs. Nathan stood at the top of the landing, holding his phone. He didn't look at her. How could you believe this? She cried. He didn't answer. Look at me, she shouted.
Illuster baby, again. And this is what you think of me.
Nathan's face didn't change. It's not just the texts. It's everything.
You've been distant.
Different. Maybe this marriage wasn't what either of us thought it would be.
And Jessica?
Was that what you thought it would be? That hit him. He flinched, but only for a second.
Pack your things, Isabella.
And that was it.
No argument.
No denial.
No confession. Just silence. Back in the motel, Isabella scrolled through Jessica's public social media account.
So many curated images.
Smiling in courtroom.
At charity events. Speaking at panels. All framed in soft light with clever captions. But there was something missing, something Isabella sensed instinctively. Guilt. Jessica had played the long game. She hadn't just stolen a man. She had orchestrated an exit.
A clean one.
One that left Isabella with nothing. But Jessica hadn't calculated that Isabella would survive it. And that would be her mistake.
Isabella shut the laptop.
She walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and looked into the mirror again. This time, she didn't see a victim.
She saw a storm waiting to break. The name Isabella Dawson was dead.
But something else was coming. Someone. And she would speak, clearly, powerfully, finally. She would not be silent anymore. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the chill lingered in the air like an unfinished sentence. Isabella left the motel early, clutching her old canvas tote with a laptop, a folder of scattered resumes, and her mother's rosary wrapped in a corner of the inner pocket. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. Staying meant thinking, and thinking meant hurting. She needed motion. Forward.
Anywhere buir.
She boarded a bus headed toward the business district. It had been nearly 2 days since that night in the Dawson estate. 2 days since Nathan's silence, Margaret's sneers, and Jessica's shadow. 2 days since Charles Whitmore had looked into her eyes and told her something impossible. That he might be her father. She hadn't returned his calls. Thomas had somehow tracked down her temporary motel and left a note at the front desk. Charles hopes you'll let him explain.
No pressure.
Just lunch. Or a walk. She tore the note in half and threw it in the trash. She wasn't ready. But curiosity is a slow-burning fuse. And some truths, no matter how long they've been buried, have a way of clawing their way to the surface. She got off the bus 2 blocks away from the Whitmore Group's headquarters, a towering glass building in downtown San Jose. She stood on the opposite side of the street, staring up at the name etched in stone.
Whitmore Group.
She didn't know why she was there. She didn't plan to go inside. But her feet wouldn't move away either. Then she heard a voice. You came. She turned. Charles Whitmore stood behind her, dressed in a gray overcoat, his expression careful, hopeful but not assuming. He looked different in daylight. Less formidable than the man from news articles. More human.
Tired, Meb.
Or just older than she remembered from the photos she'd seen. I didn't mean to follow you, he added quickly. Thomas mentioned you might be headed this way. She narrowed her eyes. You have people following me?
No.
Just one old man who worries too much. A beat passed between them. Cars moved along the street. A woman walked by with a stroller. A man in a Bluetooth headset barked orders into the air.
Normal life, buzzing all seed.
I'm not here for a reunion, she said. I didn't expect one. Then what do you want? He took a breath. To give you answers. To give you what I should have given you a long time ago. She didn't stop him when he gestured toward a nearby cafe. She didn't say yes either. But she followed. They sat in a corner booth, away from the windows. The waitress brought coffee. Neither of them touched it. Charles folded his hands on the table. Your mother, Elena, she and I met in college. She was brilliant. Wild. The kind of woman who challenged every assumption I'd grown up with. We were serious.
In love, even.
But my family didn't approve, Isabella finished flatly. They threatened to cut me off.
My fater insisted y mari someon appropriate.
I thought I was doing the right thing by walking away. You thought abandoning her was right? His throat tightened. I was a coward. Isabella looked away. She never told me she was pregnant, he continued. I didn't know.
I swear to you.
I spent years trying to find her. By the time I did, she was gone.
She'd left no trail.
She raised me alone, Isabella said, her voice quiet now. Worked 2 jobs. Cleaned houses for people like your family. She got sick when I was 21. Breast cancer. Stage 4. Charles's jaw clenched. She never took help, Isabella said. Said she didn't want charity. Said we were strong on our own. She was, he said.
So are you.
Silence stretched between them. Finally, Charles reached into his coat and pulled out an old photo, creased at the edges, the colors faded. A younger Elena stood by a fountain, her hand on a man's shoulder.
Charles.
They looked happy.
Carefree.
She was laughing. Isabella stared at it for a long time. She kept this, he said. It was mailed back to me, years later.
No return address.
Just, sent. She traced the edge of the photo with her finger.
Her mother's eyes.
Her smile. Her youth. You look like her, Charles said. But you have my eyes. She didn't reply. I don't expect you to forgive me, he added. Or to call me Dad. I
want to know you.
Even just as a friend.
Isabella gave a hollow log. You want to be friends. You want to be whatever you need. Or nothing, if that is what you decide.
She looked at him then, really looked. At the lines on his face. The regret in his voice. The distance he had clearly traveled to say just these few things. I don't need a father, she said.
I understand.
But I need a fresh start.
A chance to build something on my own. Not in someone's shadow.
He nodded. Then let me help. Not as your father.
Just a man who has made mistake.
She hesitated. I won't hand you anything, he added quickly. But I can offer an opportunity. A job.
A place to begin again.
You'll earn it. From the bottom.
No one will know your name.
She looked at him. Not even the HR department? Especially not them.
Her lips parted slightly.
A breath.
The beginning of something.
Why? She asked. Because someone once gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it, he said. And because you've spent too long letting people walk over you. It's time they looked up. Isabella looked down at her hands. For the first time in days, they weren't shaking. She nodded once. All right, she said. But I go in as someone else. Who? She looked outside toward the street, toward the passing strangers and the cars and the city she had always felt small in. Eva, she said.
Eva Reyes.
Charles nodded.
Welcome aboard, Eva.
She didn't smile. But something in her posture changed.
She wasn't Isabella Dawson anymore.
She was Eva Reyes. And this time, she would be the one writing the rules. Eva Reyes reported to the Whitmore Group under the name she had chosen herself. No traces of Isabella, no lingering shadow of the Dawsons. The company's HR department filed her paperwork without question. No one looked twice at the name. After all, she was just a new hire for an internal support position. Her role? Assistant in the cafeteria operations unit.
Not glamoureux. Not visible.
But it was a job. It was hers. And that mattered more than any title. The first few weeks were grueling. She started her mornings at 5:30 a.m., wiping down metal counters, unpacking deliveries, organizing bulk shipments of coffee, tea, paper cups, and napkins. By 7, the team was rolling out trays of pastries and opening up self-service counters. Her hands were constantly in motion, pouring, cleaning, lifting, sorting. It was hard, physical labor. She came home sore, her feet aching, her nails broken. But for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. No one expected anything from her. No one judged her accent, her clothes, her past. And no one knew what she had lost. She was anonymous.
Invisible.
Free. But she wasn't idle. At night, she studied. She watched online tutorials on Excel and project management. She downloaded podcasts on corporate operations. She reread old college textbooks she had boxed away after her marriage. On weekends, she borrowed books on negotiation, conflict resolution, financial forecasting. If she was going to rise again, she would do it not with pity or shortcuts, but with competence. One Friday afternoon, 2 months into the job, she noticed something odd in the cafeteria supplier ledger. A new delivery company had been added to the system with inflated invoices, marked approved, by an assistant procurement manager. Curious, Eva compared older records. The previous vendor charged 30% less for similar products. She flagged it quietly to her immediate supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Janine who had spent 10 years managing cafeteria logistics. Janine blinked at the report, then leaned back in her chair. Where'd you learn to spot this? She asked.
Eva shrugged. I like number.
Janine narrowed her eyes.
You're not just a barista, are you?
I'm just someone who pays attention. That weekend, Janine submitted the discrepancy to internal audit. Within days, the vendor contract was suspended. 2 procurement employees were let go. The cafeteria's monthly expenses dropped by nearly $12,000. The story spread through the building, quietly, without names. But those who needed to know knew. Charles Whitmore heard about it by Monday. On Tuesday, Eva received an invitation to meet with Human Resources. They offered her a new position, data coordinator in the administrative division. The role came with a cubicle, a laptop, and full access to the building's internal systems. She accepted without hesitation. When she walked into her new floor the following week, no one recognized her as the girl who once served them coffee. She dressed differently now, simple black blouses, fitted slacks, hair tied back in a neat bun. Her badge read Eva Reyes, Admin Ops. It was like slipping into a new skin. And she wore it well. One afternoon, while helping archive documents for an upcoming quarterly review, she came across a name she hadn't seen in months.
Dawson Holdings.
It was listed among the shortlisted bidders for a new high-profile development project, the Haven Complex, a multi-million-dollar joint venture led by Whitmore Group. Her breath caught. She flipped through the attached proposal. The branding was clean. The numbers were polished. But the signature at the bottom made her fingers tremble.
Jessica Monroe, Chief Financial Officer.
It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a full circle. Dawson Holdings had clawed its way into Whitmore's ecosystem. And Jessica was behind it. Eva took the folder home that night. She spent hours dissecting the proposal, line by line, table by table. On the surface, it looked legitimate. But Eva had learned how to read between the lines. Some cost projections were inflated. Maintenance expenses had unexplained upward trends. 3 vendors listed as affiliates were LLCs recently incorporated with no clear ownership trail. It was exactly the kind of structure used to mask kickbacks and embezzlement. But it was subtle.
Almost indétectable.
Almost. She cross-checked the LLCs against a public database. One had a registered address that matched a boutique accounting firm Jessica had once praised during a gala years ago. It wasn't proof, but it was a trail. She stared at the documents until midnight, her thoughts spinning. She could walk away. Let it go. Let them sign the contract, profit from it, continue their game. But she remembered her mother's face in the hospital. The look in her eyes when she whispered, "Never let anyone bury you." Jessica hadn't just tried to ruin her marriage. She had tried to erase her. And now she was coming for the company that had given Eva her second chance. No. Not again. A week later, Eva was summoned to a project transition meeting. The internal coordinator for the Haven Complex was transferring to another department, and a new team lead was being quietly considered. Charles didn't say anything when he saw Eva's name on the candidate list. He just circled it. The official announcement came the following day.
Eva Reyes, Project Coordinator for the Haven Complex.
Her new office was small, tucked beside a glass conference room. But it had a door, a window, and a nameplate. And when she sat behind the desk, organizing the project files, she found her own initials on every memo. R. She smiled for the first time in weeks. 3 days into her new role, she received an email marked External Partnership Review. Jessica Monroe would be arriving for a vendor meeting. Eva stared at the screen.
7 years of silence.
Now, finally, it would begin. The conference room was too bright. Its glass walls let in the pale California morning sun, casting soft shadows on the polished floor. Eva Reyes sat at the head of the table, a black folder neatly closed in front of her, a pen resting precisely in its groove. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue blouse, tailored slacks, subtle pearl earrings.
Professionnel.
Composed. Neutral. Every detail intentional. Across the table sat the senior project analyst and 2 junior consultants. The chairs around them were still half empty. They were waiting for the external financial team to arrive. The financial team from Dawson Holdings. Eva's hand didn't tremble, but her heartbeat was a steady thrum in her ears. "Are we expecting the CFO in person?" one of the consultants asked. "Yes," the analyst replied.
Jessica Monroe confirmed late last night.
Eva didn't react. She had seen Jessica's name on the itinerary 2 days earlier.
She'd read the briefing packet 3 times.
She knew what Jessica had been up to since their last encounter, climbing, manipulating, positioning herself as the polished face of Dawson Holdings' next generation. Eva had practiced for this moment. She had rehearsed every possible response, every controlled smile, every line she would deliver without emotion. But still, when the door opened and Jessica walked in, the air in the room changed. She looked exactly as Eva remembered. Blonde hair pulled into a sleek chignon, designer suit, minimalist makeup. She carried a tablet in one hand and a Louis Vuitton laptop case in the other. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile as she entered. And then she saw Eva. There was a flicker, just for a second, in her eyes.
Recognition.
Confusion. Then calculation. "Good morning," Jessica said smoothly. She offered a general smile to the room, but her eyes didn't leave Eva. Eva stood.
Jessica Monroe, she said, extending a hand. Welcome to Whitmore Group.
"I'm Eva Reyes, project coordinator for the Haven Complex." Jessica took the hand. Her grip was firm, controlled, but Eva felt the smallest twitch in the fingers. "Pleasure to meet you," Jessica replied. She didn't say anything more. Not yet. They sat. The meeting began. Eva moved through the agenda with clinical precision, budget alignment, vendor compliance, delivery timelines. She asked pointed questions, clarified data, suggested adjustments that were both reasonable and quietly undermining. Jessica answered with equal polish, her voice smooth, her gestures rehearsed. She referenced her team's past successes, cited industry benchmarks, smiled often. But Eva noticed the cracks. Jessica avoided eye contact when discussing the vendor invoices. She brushed over line items with vague generalities. She redirected technical questions to her junior associate. The most telling sign, though, was this: she never acknowledged who Eva really was. Not once.
No, Isabella. No, how are you?
No smug smile or cryptic jab. Which meant only one thing: Jessica wasn't sure. And she wasn't going to risk it. Not until she could confirm it for herself. The meeting ended without incident. Everyone stood. Business cards were exchanged. Polite nods, safe smiles. But just as Eva was about to leave, Jessica stepped closer. "Eva, was it?" she asked softly. Eva turned. "Yes."
Jessica tilted her head. You look familiar.
Eva returned the look with a measured smile. "Maybe I just have one of those faces." Jessica smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm good with faces," she said. Eva kept her voice calm. "Then I'm sure it'll come to you."
They parted without another word.
But the war had begun. Later that evening, Charles Whitmore stopped by Eva's office. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her sort through a stack of vendor reports. "You handled her well," he said. Eva looked up.
So you knew she'd be there.
He nodded. "I figured you deserved the choice. Face her or let someone else take the meeting."
Eva set the papers down.
"I needed to see her." Charles studied her for a moment. "You're not done with her, are you?" "No," she said.
She's hiding something.
"It's in the numbers." "You sure you want to go down that road?" Eva met his gaze. "I've already been down worse." He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped into the office and placed a manila envelope on her desk. "What's this?" she asked.
Something Thomas found.
Background checks on the 3 LLCs connected to Dawson Holdings. One of them is tied to a shell corporation based in Nevada. The same legal rep filed incorporation documents for Jessica's personal investment firm. Eva opened the folder.
Her eyes scanned the document, at steady.
"It's cleaner than I expected," she murmured. "But not perfect," Charles said.
You're on the right track.
Eva closed the folder. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once.
Be careful.
"If she senses you're closing in, she won't play fair." Eva smiled slightly. She never did. That weekend, Eva worked from her apartment, one bedroom, quiet, tucked behind a row of eucalyptus trees in a modest neighborhood. Her dining table was covered in spreadsheets, receipts, vendor contracts. The deeper she dug, the clearer the picture became. Jessica had created a maze of corporate entities to skim inflated costs from the development budget. Materials marked up by 15%. Transport fees routed through third-party logistics companies she indirectly controlled. Consultant payments sent to firms registered under different names but sharing addresses. It was ambitious, sophisticated, and if signed into contract, Whitmore Group would be liable for millions in diverted funds. Eva leaned back in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. But there was no time for rest. Not yet. She opened her notebook and scribbled a name, Nathan Dawson. She hadn't seen him since the night she left. But something told her he wasn't just a silent bystander anymore. Jessica had always been the sharper knife. But Nathan had always followed the scent of opportunity, even if it meant stepping over bodies. If Dawson Holdings was building this scheme, he had to know. And that meant one thing. She would have to face them both. Not as a wife. Not as a victim. But as a woman they had underestimated. And this time, she had the power. It was raining again, as if the skies of Los Angeles had decided to echo the unease in Eva's chest. The storm wasn't loud, just a persistent drizzle that painted the windows of the Whitmore Group headquarters in soft, shifting streaks. Eva stood at the edge of the executive lounge on the 25th floor, watching the city blur behind a sheet of mist. She had requested the meeting herself.
No intermediary. No Andler.
No Charles. Just her and Nathan Dawson. The man who had once been her husband. The elevator chimed. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She could feel the temperature in the room drop by a few degrees. Still hate the rain? Came his voice, casual as ever. Eva turned slowly. Nathan stood there in a tailored charcoal gray suit, black umbrella folded under one arm, his other hand slipping a phone into his coat pocket. His hair was slicked back, face clean-shaven, as charming and polished as he had always presented himself to the world. Only now, she saw the hollowness behind it. You came, Eva said. Nathan smirked. Of course. You always did have a way of making things interesting. She walked to the table and gestured toward the seat opposite her. Nathan didn't sit immediately. He wandered to the floor-to-ceiling windows, eyes sweeping over the skyline. Impressive view, he said. Whitmore's doing well, I see. Eva waited. Finally he turned, the mask of amusement slipping just slightly. He walked over and took the chair, lounging like it was his own boardroom. So, he said. What's this about, Eva? Business? Or a trip down memory lane? She opened a folder and slid it across the table. Let's stick to business. Nathan didn't reach for it. You found something. She gave a slow nod. Several somethings. Jessica's paper trail isn't as invisible as she thinks. Jessica's a consultant, he replied with a faint shrug.
You're barking up the wrong tree.
Jessica is a front, Eva countered. The real decisions come from higher up. And that means you. Nathan finally leaned forward, lifting the folder with deliberate care. He skimmed the pages, bank transfers, duplicate invoices, overlapping shell companies. He let out a low whistle. Well, you've been busy. I learned from the best, she said flatly.
Nathan's smile faded.
For a brief moment, the room was quiet except for the ticking of the rain against the glass. Nathan closed the folder and folded his hands over it. Let's say you're right, he said slowly. Let's say I did set up a few extra income streams. Creative, sure. Illegal? Not exactly.
You know how the game works, Eva.
You cut corners where you can.
You hedge risk.
By defrauding your partners? By ensuring longevity.
Diversification.
Control. Eva leaned in. You lied. You stole. And you did it while charming your way into contracts you never deserved.
Nathan's eyes narrowed.
I built Dawson Holdings from the ground up. No, Eva said, voice calm but deadly. Your father built it. You were born into it. And when you realized you weren't smart enough to keep it alive, you let Jessica do the dirty work while you took the credit. Nathan sat back, jaw tightening. Eva continued, her voice low and razor-sharp. You played the loving husband when it benefited you.
You watched your mother humiliate me, and you said nothing.
You let Jessica orchestrate a smear campaign, and you turned your back on me. That's ancient history, he snapped. No, Eva said. It's a pattern. He stood abruptly, walking a few steps away, running a hand through his hair. Look, he said, turning back. You want an apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I was young.
Arrogant.
I made mistakes. But this is business. You really want to throw away your reputation to go after me? What are you hoping to get out of this?
Revenge.
Eva stood, her eyes locked on his. No, she said.
Not revenge.
Justice. You think the world cares about justice? He scoffed. You think Whitmore will stand behind you if you blow this up? They already are, she said.
Nathan blinked.
I brought everything to Charles.
The board knows.
The legal team is drafting withdrawal clauses from every Dawson Holdings contract. And the SEC has been notified. His expression hardened.
You think you've won something?
Eva took a step closer. I don't care about winning. I care about ending this cycle, where powerful men exploit the silence of women and call it strategy. Nathan's lips curled into a bitter smirk.
You're forgetting who you used to be.
She nodded. I was Eva Dawson.
The key wife. The naive girl from Bakersfield.
The woman who cried herself to sleep while you drank champagne on balconies. Her voice strengthened. But now, I am Eva Reyes. I earned this name. I built this identity. I clawed my way back from a night like this, when someone tried to bury me in the dark and forgot I was a seed. Nathan didn't speak. His eyes flicked to the folder again. He knew the damage had already been done. Eva took one last breath and turned to leave. But before she reached the door, she paused. For what it's worth, she said over her shoulder, I don't hate the rain anymore. She left him standing there, alone with the storm and the weight of a future unraveling. Later that night, Eva returned to her apartment. The glow of the city still pulsed outside her window, but she didn't turn on the lights.
She stood in the darkness, watching the reflection move across the floor.
Her phone buzzed.
A message from Charles.
Legal confirmed. Contracts nullified. SEC meeting scheduled Monday.
Proud of you.
She didn't reply immediately. She walked to her kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the edge of her bed. She had confronted Nathan. She had stripped Jessica's empire of its foundation. But she didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Because the storm wasn't over. Not until the truth was made public. Not until justice wasn't just a whisper in boardrooms but a roar that shook walls. And tomorrow, she would make sure the world heard it. The newsroom was buzzing. Across Los Angeles, journalists had begun whispering about something strange, an anonymous whistleblower from inside the Whitmore Group.
A high-level executive.
Possibly someone close to the chair. Claims of fraud, embezzlement, and systematic exploitation running through one of the city's most prestigious corporate alliances. And early that morning, it all exploded. Eva Reyes stood in the green room of one of the country's most watched financial networks, her phone buzzing with back-to-back calls. She silenced it. The world would wait 5 more minutes. In the hallway, her publicist was pacing. Are you sure about this? He asked, voice tight. There's no going back once you speak. I know, Eva said calmly. That's exactly why I'm doing it. The producer appeared, headset slung around her neck. You're on in 90 seconds. Eva smoothed her navy blazer and stepped toward the light. Inside the studio, the anchor smiled politely from across the sleek glass table. Eva Reyes, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
You've asked for a live, unedited broadcast. I have to admit, that's highly unusual. Why now? Why today? Eva leaned forward, steady and unwavering. Because silence has a price. And it's time someone stopped paying it. The camera zoomed in slightly, catching the sharpness in her eyes. For years, the Dawson family has presented itself as a beacon of trust and innovation. They've attended charity galas, posed for magazine covers, and made promises to shareholders and employees. But behind that curtain, a different story was unfolding. The host glanced toward the control room, sensing something seismic unfolding. Eva reached into her folder and laid out a series of documents. Over the past year, I've been quietly investigating the financial dealings between Dawson Holdings and a web of shell companies connected to offshore accounts. I found evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and falsified investor reports. You're claiming one of the most powerful corporate families in California is running a fraud ring? I'm not claiming, Eva said.
I'm proving.
She held up a signed internal audit from a third-party compliance agency. Then another, testimonies from former employees. A timeline of financial inconsistencies. Leaked emails. We've submitted everything to the SEC and the Department of Justice.
The encore sat frozen.
This isn't just about fraud, Eva continued. It's about a system built on manipulation. On gender-based exploitation. I was once married to Nathan Dawson. I watched that system up close. I lived it. I was discarded by it. She let the words linger, not with bitterness, but truth. This isn't revenge. It's repair. The silence in the studio was deafening. Somewhere in a control booth, a producer mouthed, "We've gone viral." By noon, every major outlet had picked up the story.
Whistleblower Eva Reyes expose Dawson Holdings.
Live on air, corporate fraud shake-up. From silence to justice, the woman who stood alone. Social media erupted. Clips of Eva's interview flooded every platform. Hashtags trended globally. Activists praised her courage. Whistleblower advocacy groups declared her a hero. Some skeptics called it a stunt, until the SEC confirmed the documents were legitimate.
At Dawson Holdings, panic spread like wildfire.
Inside the gleaming towers of their downtown office, Jessica Law paced furiously in the war room. Nathan sat in silence, his phone clutched in one hand, his father's portrait looming behind him like a judgmental ghost. Jessica hissed, "I told you we should have handled her months ago. We underestimated her."
She's bluffing, Nathan muttered.
She's not. And if she's got the board on her side, we're finished. Nathan finally looked up. Then we fight fire with fire. Jessica raised an eyebrow. He pulled out a flash drive and tossed it on the table. We burn her reputation. That afternoon, a new leak hit the press. Anonymous documents claimed Eva had falsified parts of her resume, had benefited financially from Whitmore acquisitions, and had once used her maiden name to hide personal debts. The smear campaign was ugly. Strategic.
Fast.
But Eva was ready. She stood with Charles Whitmore in a live press conference, holding a single folder. "These allegations against me are false," she said. "And more importantly, they are predictable. This is what happens when powerful people are exposed. They lash out. They deflect.
They accuse."
She turned to the cameras. "But I will not apologize for surviving. I will not apologize for rising."
Charles stepped forward.
"The Whitmore Group stands by Ms. Reyes. We initiated the internal investigation. We empowered her to act. And we support her pursuit of justice without compromise." The room broke into flashes of cameras and reporters shouting questions.
"Eva, do you fear retaliation?"
She nodded. "Of course I do. But I fear silence more." The next 48 hours unfolded like a corporate thriller.
Fédéral agent raidait Dawson Holdings et Carter.
Jessica Law was subpoenaed. Financial officers were escorted from the building. Whistleblowers came forward, former interns, assistants, accountants, all echoing Eva's claims. Nathan went quiet. But the pressure built. A week later, he requested a private meeting with Eva. At the Whitmore offices. Charles opposed it. Eva agreed. "I need to end this," she told him. The meeting room was bare. Just the two of them. No folders. No legal counsel.
Juste memory and conséquences.
Nathan looked haggard. The shine had faded. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said.
Eva said nothing.
"I should have fought for you. Back then. I didn't." "No," she replied.
"You chose not to."
"That's different." He looked up.
"And now you will destroy everything."
"I didn't destroy anything," she said calmly. "I uncovered what you were hiding. You destroyed it long before I spoke."
Nathan's voice cracked. "Did you ever love me?" The question hung in the air.
Eva walked to the window, looked out at the city, then back at him. "I did," she said. "Once. But I loved myself more. I just didn't know it yet." She turned and walked out, leaving behind a man no longer feared, only pitied. That night, Eva sat alone in her apartment. Not to celebrate, but to rest. For the first time in years, her shoulders felt lighter. The silence she once drowned in had become her greatest ally. Not a weight, but a weapon. And tomorrow, she would return to work, not as a whistleblower, not as a survivor, but as a leader. She picked up a pen, flipped open her notebook, and wrote the first line of a new speech for young women in business. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. But when you choose to speak, make sure the world listens. And it was listening now. 6 months had passed since Eva Reyes exposed the Dawson Empire. In that time, headlines had shifted. Public attention, once laser-focused on the spectacle, now found new scandals, new wars, new distractions. But in the quieter corners of corporate America, boardrooms, law offices, business schools, the shockwaves had only just begun to settle. Eva stood at the back of a packed lecture hall at Stanford Graduate School of Business. On the stage, a professor introduced her. 6 months ago, this woman changed the conversation about corporate accountability. Today, she's here not as a scandal, but as a catalyst. Eva stepped up to the podium, notebook in hand, dressed simply in black slacks and a white blouse. Her voice was calm, steady, shaped by a newfound clarity. When I came forward, I wasn't trying to burn down a company. I was trying to tell the truth. She paused. The flames were theirs. The audience, rows of young future leaders, leaned in. I didn't do it because I'm brave. I did it because I was tired. Tired of being silent, of watching harm dress itself as success, of being complicit by inaction. If you learn anything from what happened, let it be this: the higher the ladder, the more you owe to those below. After the lecture, students crowded around her. Some were eager to ask questions, others just wanted to say thank you. A young woman with trembling hands handed Eva a letter. Your story made me walk away from an internship with a man who made me feel invisible. Eva took the letter gently.
You weren't invisible. You were surviving. And now you're living.
Outside, the wind tugged at her coat as she left the building, phone buzzing with a dozen new requests, for interviews, keynote speeches, think tank invitations. She silenced it. Later that evening, in her apartment overlooking the Pacific, she sat by her desk surrounded by research files. A new project had been keeping her up at night, an independent watchdog nonprofit she was quietly building, designed to protect corporate whistleblowers, especially women of color, who often had the most to lose and the least support. She named it Echo. Because sometimes, the echo of a single voice is enough to shake foundations. As she mapped out funding models, she received a text from Charles Whitmore.
Tomorrow's verdict is coming. Are you ready?
Eva stared at the screen for a long moment. Ready? She wasn't sure that word meant much anymore. But she would be there. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters. The United States versus Dawson Holdings had become one of the most high-profile white-collar crime cases in recent memory. Federal prosecutors had built a formidable case using not only Eva's evidence, but dozens of corroborating testimonies, ledgers, offshore account trails, and internal memos. Jessica Law had been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. She remained defiant throughout the trial, blaming Eva, the media, and even the Whitmore Group for engineering a takedown. Nathan, however, had pled guilty to multiple charges. He had sat in court each day looking smaller, more human. His once chiseled charm replaced by a haunted stillness. Eva took her place quietly at the back of the courtroom, unnoticed by most, but not by Nathan. As the judge entered and silence fell, he looked back, just once. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch. When the verdicts were read, guilty on all primary counts, Eva closed her eyes briefly, not out of satisfaction, but completion. Justice hadn't healed everything. But it had spoken. Outside the courthouse, a reporter rushed toward her.
Eva, un moment.
Do you have a statement now that the case has concluded? She turned toward the camera. Today isn't about revenge, she said simply. It's about accountability. Let this verdict be a message. Truth has weight, and it will always surface. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore Group began overhauling its corporate ethics division. Eva was offered a permanent executive role overseeing culture reform and public trust initiatives. She declined the position. Her reason was clear. I don't want to fix the system from inside anymore. I want to rebuild it from the outside. Instead, she focused fully on Echo, which began attracting attention from global human rights organizations, venture philanthropy circles, and media outlets. Still, amid the accolades, Eva remained private. She kept her social life sparse, her inner circle tight. Not out of fear, but wisdom. One afternoon, while meeting with a group of young women in Echo's new downtown LA office, Eva noticed a familiar face at the door.
Sophie Dawson. Nathan S. Junger.
They hadn't spoken in years, not since a brief, strained conversation at Eva's wedding reception. Sophie stood nervously at the entrance, holding a small package. I heard about your work, she said. I wanted to come sooner. I guess I wasn't ready. Eva motioned her inside. Sophie handed her the package. Inside was a first-edition book of poetry by Maya Angelou. There was a line you used to say when we were younger, "Still I rise." I remembered it when all this happened. I'm sorry I didn't believe you then. Eva looked up, eyes soft. Belief isn't always instant, she said. Sometimes it grows where you least expect it. They sat together, two women shaped by different scars, but connected by a shared grief, over what had been, and what could have been. In her solitude, Eva often thought of her mother. Of the resilience she had watched, quiet but ferocious. Of the nights her mother would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, saying nothing, but holding the world together by her stillness. Eva returned to that same porch one Sunday afternoon, driving out to the small town she had once called home. Her mother greeted her with the same knowing smile. You finally finished that story? Eva laughed. No. I think I'm just starting a new one. Her mother poured the tea. Together, they watched the sun descend over the hills. And in that moment, nothing needed to be said. The silence had become sacred. Back in LA, Eva stood at the dedication ceremony for Echo's new legal aid wing, named after a woman who had mentored her in her early days at Whitmore, who had died of cancer before any of this began. Eva's speech was brief. Justice is not a destination. It's a road we walk, often alone, often afraid. But each step is a whisper that becomes a voice.
And when enough voices speak, even the towers tremble.
As the audience stood in ovation, Eva felt none of the weight she once carried. She didn't feel like a woman who had broken chains. She felt like a woman who had opened a door, and left it wide for others to walk through. The months after the verdict brought Eva a quiet that was unfamiliar. Not the silence of suppression, but of peace. There were no more cameras camped outside her building, no whispered judgments in office corridors, no more internal storms over whether to speak or stay silent. But peace, Eva realized, wasn't the same as stillness. The world was still turning, still hurting, and still very much in need of voices like hers, not loud, not angry, but unwavering. Her non-profit, Echo, was growing beyond what she had imagined. The board had expanded. Law schools were collaborating to offer legal internships. A European firm offered to help establish an Echo branch in Berlin. But even as the world grew louder around her, something inside Eva quieted further. One Sunday morning, as the city blinked awake, Eva stood at her window, looking out over downtown Los Angeles. The skyline shimmered beneath the light haze, glass towers reaching toward something they could never touch. She turned away and picked up a letter she'd received days before. It was from the University of Cape Town, South Africa. They had offered her a year-long fellowship to help design a leadership program for women in post-conflict regions. The kind of work she had only dreamed of back in her early days at Whitmore, when she'd sit at her desk and sketch little blueprints of a different world on the backs of napkins. She folded the letter slowly, placed it back in its envelope, and exhaled. It was time to leave again. Before she left, Eva took care of a final few things. First, she called a meeting with the Echo board of directors and announced her intention to step down as CEO. I built Echo to protect voices, she said. But I never intended to keep it for myself. Leadership isn't about holding on. It's about letting go at the right time. They tried to protest, to persuade, but Eva was resolute. She'd already identified 2 potential successors and laid out a transition plan. Echo wasn't a person, she reminded them. It was an idea. And ideas live best when they're not chained to a single face. Her second visit was more personal. She drove across the city to a low-security correctional facility where Nathan Dawson was serving his sentence. She hadn't seen him since the trial. She didn't come to gloat or forgive.
She came for something else.
When Nathan entered the visitor's room, he looked thinner, aged. The arrogance had melted away, leaving behind a man who seemed startled by his own reflection. "You look good," he said quietly. "I'm doing good," Eva replied, correcting him gently. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eva reached into her bag and took out a single folded sheet of paper. "This is a copy of the organizational charter for Echo," she said. "You once told me the system would never protect people like me. Now it does. In part because of you, what you did, what you didn't do. That's your legacy, whether you want it or not." Nathan didn't respond at first. His fingers trembled slightly as he accepted the paper. "I was weak," he finally said. "I let people talk me into believing I had no choice." "You always had a choice," Eva said. "You just never wanted to face the consequences. But now you are." She stood. "I didn't come here for closure. I already have it. I came to make sure you understood, I don't carry you with me anymore." She left before he could say another word. 2 weeks later, Eva boarded a plane at LAX. She had only one suitcase, a laptop, and a carry-on with notebooks and a worn copy of Audre Lorde's essays.
The window seat overlooked the wing. As the plane rose into the sky, the skyline of Los Angeles faded beneath the clouds.
She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Cape Town met her with rain. Not the gray drizzle of Los Angeles, but a heavy rhythmic downpour that washed the city clean. She rented a modest apartment not far from a university and took daily walks through the streets, learning their rhythms. The program she helped design was ambitious, training women in leadership, conflict resolution, digital literacy, and media protection. Many of the participants were survivors, of war, of abuse, of silence. And yet, they walked into the room each day with fire in their eyes. Eva no longer saw herself as a survivor. That title, once hard-earned, no longer defined her. She was something else now. A witness. A builder. A bridge. One evening, as she was preparing a lesson plan, one of the students lingered behind. "Miss Reyes," she said in a soft accent, "do you ever wish it had never happened?"
Everything, the scandal, the betrayal, the pain.
Eva paused. Looked up. "No," she said simply. "I wish it had happened sooner." Near the end of her fellowship year, Eva received a letter forwarded from the Whitmore Foundation. Inside was a check, sizable, anonymous, with only a single sentence typed on fine stationery. "Use this to keep building." She knew immediately who had sent it. She deposited the money into Echo's new emergency defense fund. Even legacies built on silence could still fund voices, she thought. Irony had its uses. On her last night in Cape Town, Eva stood on the shore of Blaubergstrand Beach. The wind lashed her coat, the ocean thundered, and the stars glittered with an indifference that felt holy. She opened her notebook and scribbled a final line.
"Some storm don't destroy.
They carve new coastlines." She closed the book. At sunrise, she boarded another plane.
Destination unknown.
She didn't need an itinerary. She carried her compass within her now. And the echoes of her voice? They were still moving. Still speaking. Still making the powerful kneel.